Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. We're going to be starting in a moment. This is the webinar about unlocking business value from file data. Um, we will just wait a couple of minutes for more people to join, but meanwhile, I do want to tell you that we are counting on your participation in this session. That means that we'll be asking you some questions with polls just to hear where you are in your journey. And also, we very much want this to be a discussion. So any questions you have throughout the session, there is a Q&A section, and we want you to ask as many questions as you can in the Q&A, which we will address during the session, and also we'll leave time at the end of the session. So this is really, I think, important because we are talking about something which is relatively new. And if it's the first time that you're hearing this, or the first time that you're hearing about these products, it's fine to ask questions and we will clarify anything that is not clear. So my name is Robert Bell. I'm from NetApp, and I'm going to be presenting with my two good colleagues. Lisa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hey there, everyone. Lisa Kidder. I'm a cloud solutions architect at NetApp, focused on all things AWS and FSx for NetApp ONTAP.
And we have Ben.
Hi, folks. Ben Littman. I've been at AWS for almost 10 years now. I focus on migrating VMware workloads to AWS, and one of my specialties is how do we integrate the NetApp products with all these things that we migrate. Nice to meet you.
And I'm Robert Bell. I'm a product specialist at NetApp, focused on a product called FSx for ONTAP. The long name is Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, but we'll call it FSx for ONTAP for this session so that it won't take too long. And today we're going to be talking about something new on Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, which is S3 access points, which is something that really helps. It helps do more with file data. This is relatively new. You might have heard about it because it was announced in the latest reInvent, but it really is something that I think is exciting because it is a new approach that opens up opportunities for things that were, I would say, slightly challenging to do before, and now they've suddenly become incredibly easy. So we're going to be talking about that in this session. I just want to remind all the people that have just joined, please ask questions in the Q&A. There's a chat section and there's a Q&A section. We want you to ask the questions in the Q&A so that we can address these questions during the session. And we will have time at the end for any questions we didn't manage to answer. And we're also going to be asking you questions so that we can hear what you think about different topics. And in fact, now that we can get started, I want to start with the first poll question. So we'd like to know how familiar you are with Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. So if you could just answer either that you use it for data storage on AWS, or you know about it but haven't used it yet, or that you have very little knowledge. So please choose the answer that's correct for you. And then this is important for us to know because we're going to kind of maybe fine tune the way we talk about it based on whether you're familiar with it or not. So now we're going to see the answers, and we got a very mixed answers here. So I think that the majority are either using it or know about it. And there are some people that know little about it. So we will make sure when we talk about the product to kind of make it clear what we're talking about in the different sections so that you won't feel that this is something that is missing. So what we're going to talk about in this session is, first of all, an issue, an accessibility gap, something that just happened that occurred that made it slightly more challenging than you would expect to use data that you have with services that you need to use. In a very particular case, where this gap kind of was there were ways to overcome it, but now we have something that just eliminates this problem completely, which allows you to do more with the file data. So we will explain what this is, but then we'll give practical use cases because the goal here is not to learn the theory, but rather to see how you can use this new approach, this new capability in your own organization. We're going to be talking about use cases for Gen AI, for machine learning and analytics, and for process automation, all of this across different industries. Then we'll kind of summarize and show you really how you can start using this as soon as possible. So now maybe Ben, you can give us like a little bit of why this is a big issue and where the whole issue of files really has become a challenge.
Yeah, it's a good question, Robert, right? So I think every organization has file data, right? We've got home directories, we've got group shares. We've used file servers for decades, right? So that's already baked into the landscape. And it's not a terribly exciting thing. People are like, yeah, we have all this data here. Um, we use it for business processes or sharing files or collaboration, whatever it is. It's a necessity, right? But what I hear in the market right now is an excitement around all of this AI, and it's not about experimenting and playing. It's really about those business outcomes. It's about realizing value quickly. And that's what we try to focus on at AWS is how can we make it easy to start experimenting and say, wow, that was actually easy and it added business value. Let's keep it versus, oh, that was interesting, but let's, turn it off and stop doing that. So I think this story is really about we've got all this data, all this value, and now we have all these neat AI services and agents and things. And how do we marry the two together and get business outcomes with all of our unique and special and powerful data?
Yeah,
I
and I think
think
that
something that we see all the time is that, organizations struggle with understanding what their data is. This 80% of data is unstructured is a really powerful number, especially with that line on the bottom, right? I mean, this data is not just files anymore. It's documents, it's audio, it's scattered everywhere. And people don't really know not only what that data is, but where it is. And so it's really impactful to see that 80% number to talk about, kind of potential when you mention those AWS services that you work with.
yeah, and the feeling is that this data is kind of left out because first of all, like you said, you're not really sure what's in there, and um, there are also challenges when it comes to bringing these file data into the new services, and that's really what we're going to be talking about here. But first, we do want to ask another question just to keep you alert, keep you involved. Here we want to see what kind of like describes your experience when it comes to storage on AWS. So please let us know if you have what your level of experience or involvement is when it comes to storage on AWS. Either you're not involved at all, or you have some basic knowledge, or you're actually working on projects right now, or even designing and taking responsibility for production and architecture when it comes to storing the data. So soon we're going to see the answers. Oh, this is interesting. So yeah, this is actually good news that most of the people here are involved with storage. Few have no experience, but again, I think that this is something that people are familiar with, and it is something that I think anyone who deals with storage understands the challenge of when it comes to making the storage accessible for different services. So what I think the main issue here is that enterprise file systems are something that have been around for decades. So there are enterprise systems that generate these files, and this is kind of like the core knowledge, the unique knowledge that every organization has. So depending on which industry you're in, if whether it's information coming from sensors or from logs or from documentation files, product files, engineering files, customer calls, whatever it is, there are lots of these files being generated, and that is kind of like a unique fingerprint of the organization. A lot of the time it's in file systems. And then there, on the other hand, you've got the services that are driving innovation. AI, machine learning services like Amazon Bedrock, SageMaker. these services that really allow you to start putting AI and machine learning into production. And then you've got the analytics services, which take the data and really generate these great insights and business intelligence. And obviously all of the serverless and cloud native services. Now, typically these are services that rely on S3 as the data source. And when it comes to accessing a file system, that can be a challenge. That does require often the issue of copying files into an S3 data lake, creating these data lakes, sometimes doing ETL or transforming the data into a format that can be processed by the services. So this, I think, is something that has been a challenge because when you talk about the data in the enterprise file systems, taking it out of that system, duplicating it means that you have to synchronize data and you have to make sure that everything is the access permissions are all in place, the security is all in place. There's a lot of overhead when it comes to that. So it might take longer or it could delay these projects. But what has happened is that instead of making this process more efficient, what has happened with S3 access point is that this problem has actually been eliminated completely. So if this enterprise file system is on FSXN, you can solve this. And maybe, Lisa, you could give us a little bit of an idea of how this architecture would work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned kind of that painful process, that ETL pipeline that has traditionally had to occur to get data into, S3 compatible data has always been very lengthy, and it's a lot of extra work. And honestly, most importantly, it's a lot of extra risk. So with the S3 access points, it eliminates the need for any sort of movement. So that kind of movement, a lot of that additional risk and challenge that comes with changing data types goes away, because the data that sits in FSx for NetApp ONTAP that is stored as files just like it always has been is now seen as if it were S3 and is now usable by the Amazon services that require the S3 data. So that change of what the data looks like from its kind of native habitat no longer has to be confused or changed or put at risk.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
And I would say you're also preserving some of the superpowers of NetApp, right? Because it's already compressed, compacted, deduplicated. Maybe you have snapshots doing protection. So not only are you walking away from all of that by making a second copy of this thing in S3, but there's also obviously the cost, right? That S3 bucket will charge you by the gig, it'll charge you for the API calls. So this not only streamlines your approach, it preserves all the value that NetApp is bringing to that file storage. But it's also taking step one out of a multi-step process, which is ETL and move this stuff, and now we can start using it, right?
yeah,
Well, and then you're
and I think
accessing live data, right? I mean, it's not a copy. So the question of what
Yeah.
do I need to copy and how do I keep it up to date aren't really questions anymore with this, because it's just your data.
yeah, and I think that it's not a question of, you don't have to choose anymore. So it's not about, okay, do we choose file or do we move it to S3? It's what's happening here is that everything remains in the file system. So any user or any application that is accessing these files keeps on accessing it the same way. So the user workflows, the application workflows, everything stays exactly the same. But these new services that you are introducing to the data, they see it as if it was in an S3 bucket. And that's, I think, the most important thing here, that it appears as if it's in an S3 bucket, so you don't need to teach these services how to deal with files. They see it as if it was an S3 bucket. They use it exactly in the same way they would use an S3 bucket. So I think we're going to ask you another question. And now the question is around how much involvement you have or your organization has in these AI use cases. And we know that everyone is interested in implementing AI in their organization. It's really across the board in every possible way. The question is how far are you in this journey? Is it something that is just a thought, a plan, an idea, or is it something that you're actually using as a core part of what your organization is doing. So there's really a lot of different options here. It might be difficult to pinpoint where you are right now, but we'd like to get an idea of what stage you are in the AI journey.
Yeah, what I'm seeing is coding is taking off, right? That's an obvious one. Everyone sees the value. You can code 100 times faster, and then now you're focusing on quality control and architecture. But I think the next big movement will be business processes, right? All these things that we don't want to have to do, approvals and workflows, where there's just a human that has to be that little piece of chain that moves a workflow on using agents and MCPs to connect to data sources and then do those approvals. And then maybe the human is just overseeing those decisions or flagging exceptions. I think that's the next big thing. And that's really where I think this feature is going to come in, because those business processes, you don't have to say, oh, well, we can't do that yet because we need to set up that glue job or whatever, data sync to get our data into S3, and then we can start scanning it with Macy and indexing it with Glue and building data catalogs of what's in there. Or as Lisa said, even just doing the discovery, right? Like, let's do the discovery and set up these copy jobs and then start using it. Well, once you discover, and you can just drop your access point in and start consuming it. So I think that's the next big movement, is going to be trying to take some of these tedious tasks out of our life.
Right. And what we can see from the results of the poll is that really there's a majority here that has active AI initiatives in progress. So it is happening. And I think that that makes absolute sense. I mean, there's just a lot of low-hanging fruit when it comes to AI. And I think that's really what we want to show here. There's obviously it's unlimited. When if you have you just need to use your imagination. You can do incredible things and have AI really transform the business. But some things are kind of like really just too easy to ignore. And I think one of the things is just taking the data that you already have, and this data that Lisa, you mentioned, some of it you're not even sure what's in there, and then just feeding that into the Gen AI to produce something. So maybe Lisa, you could like give us an idea of what kind of data would be relevant for this and how it could be used in AI.
Yeah, I mean, all sorts of data, really. I mean, unsurprisingly, Gen AI is the first use case that everyone kind of wants to talk about because everyone wants to use Gen AI. And the natural first step when you're starting to explore generative AI is to connect the models that you want to use with the data that you have. So you can generate real insights based on your actual environment. So that environment could be, you see the things listed on the screen: research and reports, policies and procedures, communications is huge. And there's still that gap that we talked about in the beginning of, you want your Gen AI to actually give you real insights based on your data, but your data lives in files, inside of those product specs, inside of those customer communications. And if we talk specifically about Bedrock, it's expected to be accessible through S3 APIs. And that's common amongst all of the Gen AI tools inside of Amazon. So traditionally, like we mentioned before, you have to duplicate the file. So with FSX for NetApp ONTAP and S3 access points, it just gives you access to those services in an S3 compatible way where the data actually lives. So then it gives you, kind of the key capabilities that Bedrock was built for, summarization and knowledge assistance and content generation.
And then I guess the use case would change depending on the industry, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you can see across industries, but even within subsets of industries, there's the financial services, and they can kind of do natural language questions against large set policy and compliance documents. But that goes beyond just financial services, right? Just asking questions based on your documents. In healthcare, you can have Gen AI analyze and summarize research papers to actually help research extract insights faster. Manufacturing, AI can work with engineering documents and design files to answer real questions about specific products and specifications. And then in professional services, right? I mean, you have firms that can actually build agents to search large collections of contracts and case files. And I mean, across all these examples, the pattern is the same. It just gives you value from your data that can then generate new information.
Yeah. So this is, I think, really the idea is, as you said, Lisa, yourself, that not knowing what data is contained in these file systems. This is on the first step is really understanding the data, but then also putting it to use, making it work for you, making the data work for you. And I think another interesting use case or collection of use cases is around machine learning and analytics. Now, the thing here is that if you go to AWS and you look at the analytics services and the machine learning services, you got this collection of services that really eliminate the necessity to start building complex architectures and having this infrastructure that with complex processes is all as a service. So, for example, AWS Glue, which does the ETL, the extraction transformation of the data. So you can take unstructured data, scan it with AWS Glue, and structure it. Then you can use Athena for just doing SQL queries, but without having to build a SQL database. You've got SageMaker that then can take the structured information and turn that into your own private foundation model, which is customized to your own organization. And then you've got Amazon Quick, which you can just tell it what kind of dashboards you want, and you can see the information instantly. But when it comes to creating your own foundation model, which is really something that I think every organization can benefit from. What that does, especially when now that this data is just directly fed into these services transparently with the S3 access points. The cool thing there is what you're doing is you're creating the normal behavior of your organization. So if it's a bank, for example, you want to know what your clients are doing, how they're doing it, and to create this normal baseline so that when customers are doing transactions, you can compare that to the normal behavior and detect anomalies, which would mean that if suddenly one of the clients is doing something from a different location, from a different using a different currency, in a different way that doesn't fit the normal behavior, SageMaker that created this model will then say this is flagged as potential fraud. So you've got this fraud detection system just from learning the data. If you're in retail, you can find the anomalies when it comes to supply and demand. You can see that potentially there's going to be some issue, and you can prevent that in advance. The same with manufacturing, based on how the equipment, based on the sensor information, the equipment has been performing. If there is a machine that's about to fail, you can prevent that in advance. You can do the predictive maintenance based on this model, this customized model, and in IT and software as a service, really analyzing logs and finding operational issues. And all of these things, when it comes to either preventing fault in advance or just even preventing unnecessary maintenance, these are things that save huge costs. And the whole process is really just without any additional infrastructure, just based on the existing information without copying any data.
Another important part of the story is security, right? Because if you're adopting a model like this, you can expose these models through private endpoints, no internet access. You're not calling an Anthropic or OpenAI server stack in some other data center. It's there in AWS, right? Your S3 access point can have private access to a file system. So again, no open firewalls or internet access. And then using things like Bedrock and SageMaker, you can utilize guardrails to ensure that topics or keywords are filtered out. You can mask and unmask based on role for PII, credit card data, things like that. And then you can also use things like Clarity for bias detection, right? So some of the stuff you'd have to really kind of bake on your own to do in your own data center to call some public API endpoint for a model, whereas in AWS, all of this stuff can be wrapped up securely. So you're now just going through an API gateway and you have an app coming in, performing its action, and then returning with the response. And then all the token processing and data is just securely stored in the cloud.
Yeah. And
On to that
I did want
point,
to
I mean, I
actually
think, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think that there is an issue that some of the data is actually not necessarily in FSx for ONTAP. It could be in the data center, right? And I think you've encountered that where the data is not actually there. So what would you do in that situation when it's in, the on-prem ONTAP, for example?
Yeah, well, there was a participant, George, that had a really good point, right? That, some customers don't want to move to the cloud, or maybe it doesn't make sense for them. Like, here's a great one, DVR data, right? I had customers that are like, I have a huge campus, a big educational institution, and they're like, we create terabytes of DVR data. They were like, just the cost of pushing that up a direct connect to store it on S3 didn't make sense. So there could be times when you're like, I don't want to move the data, but other data needs to be resident, right? So like manufacturing systems, you may have to have the data right there. But then you're like, well, I want to do all this cool stuff you're talking about. And they may also need DR. So in that case, what I would recommend is snap mirror from your on-prem NetApp to an FSx for ONTAP file system. And then you can put your access point on the DR copy. So now you've checked your DR requirements off, but you've also placed a copy of that data as fast as snap mirror can push it into a place where all these services can just be plugged in. So that was a really cool use case where you're like, all right, I have to have the data here, but I also want it somewhere else for DR, but for these other reasons. So that really makes sense where you're not ready to just get rid of the data center because it doesn't make sense, but you also want to tap into some of these features.
Yeah, I was going to echo that same conversation because, when we're talking about NetApp, all three of us are talking about cloud, but the conversation goes beyond that. And, like Ben said, there's been some good Q&A conversations around it's not just all cloud. And that's kind of the beauty of NetApp because, if we're talking about sensor data, for example, that sits everywhere across the globe and it's typically centralized somewhere. It may be centralized in a lot of different places, and you want to be able to use that data and run with that data, especially with analytics, anywhere. And so that's kind of the magic of it. It could be on-prem data, it could be in the cloud, it could be some combination of both. And that's kind of the beauty of data sitting everywhere with that app.
So we just want to show one more use case, which is about, I think, something that every single organization is really has been struggling with over the years, really turning the manual, time-consuming and processes that require a lot of people doing a lot of things, automating that. Now, this is something that's always been an issue and always been constantly improving. But I think when it comes to the tools that we have now in AWS, especially with some of the AI-driven tools, that can really be streamlined significantly, right, Ben?
Yeah. That's exactly where I think this next big movement is coming from. Like I was saying earlier, this is so expensive for some companies. They have, fleets of consultants doing these business processes, just pushing paper back and forth. Right now, if you can transform those humans from a business process component to oversight, that human can do so much more work where they see all the, this looks good, this looks good. Hey, this is concerning. Let's zoom into that one, right? So I think that's really going to improve people's efficiency and extract more business value, right? Your existing fleet of consultants can work 10 times faster, for example, right? So, yeah, I'm actually involved in a couple initiatives where I do, proposal review or contract review with the technical validation, and we're looking at that right now. How can we plumb up MCPs to our CRM, to all these other systems and start taking these things and saying, let's input them in through an agent, and then we just do the quality control rather than a human being responsible for just driving that actual paperwork across. And yeah, you can use step functions and textract, for example, to, maybe you're taking forms and you're extracting them out and identifying what kind of form they are and making sure that like maybe it's a medical use case and you're like, I need to make sure that this comprehend, for example, understands medical codes and drug names and things like that. So there's a lot of really interesting use cases across all these industries that I think we can all start working a little smarter and faster, and increase quality control. I think that's a big part of the story is humans aren't very good at doing mundane, repeatable tasks perfectly hour after hour after hour. We get bored, we get disinterested, right? So I think when the AI is taking that burden off of us and just surfacing issues or giving a quick stop go signal at the end, I think that's really going to be a game changer.
Mhm.
Yeah, and another use case I've seen, kind of related to this is really just file ingestion, right? I mean, SFTP through AWS Transfer Family is probably one of the first use cases that was brought up. It's probably one of the least exciting yet most applicable to so many folks that are probably listening to this is just, how do we actually get this file into where we need it to be, kind of feeding that document processing workflow that, Ben just kind of talked about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think if we look at these three use cases, it's really just to summarize it very simply, there's operational and business advantages. And I think that what is important to remember across all of these different examples that we showed, I mean, it could be data that is on FSx for ONTAP or snap mirrored from on-prem, like we said. But there's one single source of the data. The data is not duplicated, it's not replicated or changed in any way. So everything that you're doing with the data today, everything stays exactly the same. There's full access for all of the users, including the S3 side of things. And when it comes to permissions, you're not just exposing all the data to a new service. You are choosing a specific permission, which is already defined in the system, and using that to access only the files that that service needs to use. So it is also something that not only is secure, but also doesn't require you to start rewriting all of the access controls. And then from the business side, I mean, really what we spoke about, the fact that you just feed it directly into Amazon, whether it's Amazon Bedrock, SageMaker, or Amazon Quick, all of these services that just take the data, process it, and start generating insights. You got much faster access to your AI initiatives. They will work much faster. And we're going to show you an example of how fast it really is. But the quality of your AI initiatives really does depend on the quality of the information that you're feeding into the system. So if you have a lot of data and a lot of context, you feed that and you get much better insights and much better results from these initiatives. So I just some quotes that we got from customers that really have started using this, are really excited about the fact that you really just keep the existing workflows. You don't have the users complaining because you shifted the whole storage system. Everything is exactly the same. All of the cool features that you had with ONTAP, the ONTAP features, they all stay exactly the same. What you're doing is now enabling these new services to ingest the data and to generate really cool insights. Plus the whole issue of the fact that you don't have multiple copies to manage. You don't have to do all these workflows for continuously making sure that if something changes on one side, that you're updating it on the other side. You don't have to rewrite any of the rules or any of the access permissions.
Well, and I think that's huge right there is, when you think about this and how much effort you've put into building your file system, right? I mean, you've put so much into the permissions, into the security, into the data protection, and all of that effort is potentially lost without it. And so that's kind of what this company is calling out is all that work is not for nothing at the end of the day because it meant something and it could stay that way.
Yeah, so what we'd like to do before we finish is just to show you a quick demo. This is sort of like a demo of just the example we're taking here is having a Gen AI application based on Amazon Bedrock, which connects Amazon Bedrock basically connects the application to whatever foundation model you want. But this needs a knowledge base. And this knowledge base, what we want to do here is use the data that's been generated by enterprise applications with the S3 access point to ingest that data so that the knowledge base understands this data. So maybe Ben, you want to sort of like just walk us through what would happen in this case? I mean, what the steps are.
Exactly. So this is assuming that you already have your file servers, right? Your FSx for ONTAP is already there. So really, this is 4 API commands. That's it. You could chain these off and fire it off and have your Bedrock RAG working in 4 API commands. So the first one is to create the S3 access point. You just need to point it to the resource ID for your file system, tell it what volume to attach to. By the way, the access point is free. you get charged based on any S3 activity you do against it, right? So puts and gets, list items, things like that, charged per GB, just like S3 would work. But the access point is free. And then the second step is to create the Bedrock knowledge base that does the whole 7-step RAG process for you, from retrieve to chunk to vector, all of that stuff. And then you just tell it to start the retrieval and ingestion job, and it starts crawling and reading through all that content. So really, it's 4 steps, and then after it's initialized, you can go into the playground and start throwing queries at it. With the ultimate step being, you would put some front end or web interface or something like that in front of it. But then you can just test it right there and say, tell me about my 10Ks and the financial reports. How did we do this year versus last year, right? For me, in IT, help desk use case is huge, right? Maybe I've got all these run books in Word docs or PDFs or whatever, and maybe I can even access my support case management system, right? And then you're asking it questions about why did this thing throw an error, and you're like, oh, hey, the disk is probably full. You should clear some space out. Or imagine in a healthcare use case where a doctor is in an OR and there's something weird happening, and they ask a chatbot, and the chatbot knows the entire history of this patient, and it's guardrailed down to just this patient, so we don't pull things out of other people's records, right? But it could know so much information that a doctor could never spin up on that before surgery, right? So there's so many use cases, and what I like to think about is each of the customers, or if we are the customer, each of our business units and our processes, just think through where could I add some value and see if I can work more efficiently or cut manual processes, because I bet you'll start finding these use cases. We just had it was like a hackathon for one of our growth initiatives where everyone involved in the team was like, use all of our tools and spend the entire day seeing what you can automate. And I ended up uh, putting a URL scraper together that could go through a list of like 100 URLs, pull data off the screen, manipulate the query strings in the URLs. And I would just run this thing with the skill that I taught Amazon Quick. And it was a 2-hour process I did weekly, sometimes more when people wanted the data refresh more often. And I can just call it and go do other stuff. And 5 minutes later, all my data is refreshed. So I think some of this is going to be you all in the field just starting to play with it and talk to your peers and your other stakeholders, and just look for these opportunities, because I think you'll start finding them when you start playing with it. Lisa, what comes to mind for you for this?
Yeah, I mean, the limit's kind of endless, and it's funny when you mention the IT chatbot. I actually had a few customers come to me almost with the opposite direction, right? They had all these really cool models that they had built over the years, but they didn't have that model, that access to their AI. It was just generic internet content. And so when you kind of put that together with what we're talking about today, it really unlocks the value of those little things like the healthcare or the IT support desk, because the models are out there and they're really cool, and you really don't have to build your own very much anymore because there's so much out there, but you need to actually apply it to your environment. So I think it's really cool hearing all these little stories, and to the examples of that little SFTP server that I was talking about earlier. It was a small department within a larger company, and we didn't even realize that this was a need within a tiny department that was completely isolated from the IT organization. So yeah, come to us with more examples because we're finding more and more every day, and it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and I
just
think
internally, my specialist org, we're actually building an agent right now to, be the front line when people come to ask someone like me for help. And all we had to do was we built this chatbot, and we can give it the URLs. So we feed it all the product docs, right? And then we also come up with playbooks like, here's the DR patterns, or here's some architecture options, here's what's certified and supported, right? So we feed it all of these things that someone like me spend years getting up to speed on, and then I get a request, and when it's like a 100 or 200 level, it just gives them a really concise but thorough vetted answer. And our bet is that that will automate a certain percentage of our internal specialist engagement requests. And then it'll flag the ones for like really big opportunities or really complex opportunities and say, this is a great summary, but we're now going to pull, Ben in to really have a call with your customer deep dive. So, even internally, we're building these things just to help work faster and smarter.
Yeah, so there needs to be a conversation between the IT people who know what data there is, and then the application people who are trying these new AI or ML or analytics services, and just saying, okay, how can we combine these? And now it's really as simple as we showed, just a few clicks, and you've got this. You're bridging this gap, and you create this fusion between a certain data set and a certain service, and then you can try it out, see how it works. If it works, you continue. If not, you try something else. There's no infrastructure that you're building here. So you're basically, and the idea of having a hackathon is great. You just have a hackathon and get different teams to try different things and just see what works. And then if it works, just make it part of the business.
Yeah. Now, some of this might still involve ETL, right? There are still good reasons to do that. Like, for example, you may want to take log data that's in a text or a CSV file and convert that to Parquet or Orc, for example, right? And then once you have it in a columnar format, you can use Athena to do partial queries like, hey, just give me this time frame. Now you're searching millions of files, but you're not retrieving the whole file. You're just taking the chunk of the file that's relevant, right? So there still are some good use cases. Or maybe you're going to say, hey, wait, I want this in a document database, like a MongoDB compatible document DB. And it's just going to take it from whatever text format into a JSON, file it into a database. Maybe you want to do some sort of ACID types SQL queries against it or something like that, right? So I still think there is room for ETL. It's just not a mandatory step one to get it out of the file server onto a bucket and then start using it. You can consume in place.
Yeah. So I think, we showed some use cases here, but it's really a matter of just checking it out. The thing to remember here is that you got files, and until recently, these files have kind of been siloed. They've been isolated and left out of the whole AI initiative. But now they can be used and seen as S3 buckets. In the demo that we showed, the it was Amazon Bedrock knowledge base. It sees the files as if they're in an S3 bucket. It doesn't, you have to teach the services anything new. They just see the files. So taking that, using that, creating these new initiatives is really just so easy that what we want to do is just encourage you to get started, try it out. And this is just really, I think, it will open up new opportunities on the business side, but also internally for finding out what kind of information you have, seeing how you can leverage this information for new business initiatives. So I think I don't see any open questions that we need to address right now, but any final words? Lisa, Ben, anything you want to kind of like just send the people off with?
Yeah, I like to always have a call to action, right? And generically it's start playing and experimenting, but really don't forget that we're out here. NetApp has specialists like Lisa, right? Come to us and ask us because we might have seen this before and can get you started a little quicker. We've got programs called experience-based accelerators, for example, where we can send a small army of people on a full 2-day engagement and actually launch and deploy one of these solutions with you, aligning all your stakeholders and then showing you that art of the possible hands-on. Of course, we have partners and professional services available if you're like, this sounds great, but there's all this work to do to get from A to Z, right? So please ask us how we can help you. And if it's just a technical question or an art of the possible things, find a solutions architect like me or Lisa, and we'll help get you started quicker with this, these known good practices. Lisa, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, we have a whole army behind each one of us here that is ready and excited to help. And I love the emphasis on the four commands. I mean, that's really all it takes to start playing around with this. And it's pretty simple and I didn't honestly believe it when I heard this at reInvent. It was pretty exciting. And I immediately pulled out my laptop and started playing around with it. And it really is that simple to get started. And assuming you're not, to your point about the cost comparison, you're not querying against it a ton. It's pretty low cost because the API calls are free. So it's just very interesting to kind of to have that conversation. So we can talk about cost, we can talk about kind of how to actually implement this. But really, Ben and I and our whole teams are ready to get started.
Yeah, and I just want to say there is actually quite a lot of documentation out there. If you look at the AWS documentation, but also some blogs that have been released with kind of like specific use cases with how to. So it's worth, I mean, just Google it. You'll find if you write FSX ONTAP S3 access points, you'll find a lot of resources for that. We're also going to be sharing this information, sharing this recording so that you can show this to your colleagues who might have missed this session. Um, so I think that now we've kind of like reached the end of the time. So I'd really like to thank Lisa and Ben for this great session. It was, I think, very interesting because it's really something that is, I think, a game changer, and it's very exciting to see what companies are doing now with this new available technology. It's really going to be an exciting adventure, and it's just getting started. So thank you very much for everyone who participated. And we'll see you in the next webinar, I hope.
Thanks for having
Thank you
us.
very much.